So this is a Paul Clare lathe. It's Ornamental Turning lathe. I got it, well, my husband got it from his father, who purchased it from Paul Clare. And so it's probably 25 years old. And so it actually sat in my garage for about 10 years after my husband passed away. And then I decided, because the Ornamental Turning Symposium was in Seattle, close enough to me, that I would go and see if I could find out how I could get it up and running. So the first thing I realized was that it needed to be at a height that I could reach it without getting on a box, because I have to move around in order to and the people at the symposium told me, go home and play with it, you can't break it, so just get on with it. So I did, but first of all, my son moved it in the garage to where I could reach it, and fortunately for me, he is just had a knack for where things should plug in, otherwise it would still be unused. So the premise of this lathe is that it turns on a rosette, and so it will carve the shape of the rosette, and so you put your piece of wood attached on here, and this is going to rotate at the same time this rosette is going to turn, and the blade, which has a round, well, it's got two little pointed blades that are rotating on kind of like a little flying saucer, but it carves out a rounded cut. And so this section will move in towards the wood, and then the blade will move in and out. So that's how you distance. There is another little tiny, there's a switch under here, which I didn't realize, but it actually will turn in tiny increments, but I think it's stuck, and I've been working with it for a year and a half and didn't really realize that until last month. So I figured it can stay stuck because I have been moving it in tiny increments and doing just fine. So this is actually an older model. When I went to the symposium, there were a few people that had these, but they had moved on to a newer type. Most of them were going after the Lindo lathe. And anyways, but this is what I have, and I played with it, and I've made probably 30 some odd bowls, and I'm having fun with it. And I like my style of bowls, which is actually not as lightweight. I like to actually have a feel of the wood, and I have a cabinet full of wood that belonged to my husband, and also Grandpa has been sending me his wood, and so sometimes I don't know what the piece of wood is, but I just pick out a sometimes I figure out, okay, I'd like to make a bowl in this style, and then I find a piece of wood to match, and sometimes I find a piece of wood and I think, oh, I really like this color, grain, whatever, and then I find the rosette, or the size and shape based on the piece of wood. And the piece that I like is that I get to see while I'm standing here, because pretty much one bowl is a weekend project, And while I'm standing here moving the blade in and out, and I see all the layers of grain and color. And so when the bowl is finished, whoever gets the bowl, or whoever sees the bowl, that's what they see. And I've seen all of the degrees of changes in it. So there's all these switches on here, so you have to turn it on. Then this one turns the blade. This one turns the vacuum, which I use at the end because that's just one more noise that I don't want to deal with the whole time. So there's the engine that's turning the block of wood that's attached to a truck, which there isn't one on there at the moment. And it's also turning the Rosette, and I have speed over here, so I can turn it up and turn it down slow. So depending on, I can turn it up faster if I am just rounding it out. And so the more detailed and the more, not necessarily detailed, but the deeper the dips in the Rosette, some of them have considerable change in dimension, and those ones I try to go a little bit slower on that. So the other thing that I found out, because I had a problem that just I couldn't figure out, was that this was the blade would skip as it came down the curve. I emailed John McGill, who was at the Ornamental Turning Society Symposium, and after a few back and forth email, he helped me to figure out, or he explained that this was a possibility, and it turned out that's what it was. So initially, I had set this connection, this blade post, in the center. So the blade was farther back, and then so he explained that the skipping is probably due to the distance between my piece of wood and the blade. And so, because the farther I would crank this to get inside, then the more it would skip. So, undid this, moved this down to as close as I could get to the motor. And then on projects, then I add a piece of just stock wood that, and sometimes I have several pieces on here, because sometimes I just use the same piece. It's already glued up. I just glue on another piece and keep going. And so as long as I close the distance between the chuck and my project and the end of the blade, then I don't have that skipping problem. So that was a huge thing, because ornamental turning with a skip in it does not make for a nice project.
So if someone wanted to go shopping, where do they go?
I would suggest, if you wanted to shop for a lathe just like this, that you contact, look up the website for the Ornamental Turning Society, and they have a newsletter that goes out. John Lee is the one that writes the newsletter, and he would probably be able to find somebody that had one like this, because I know there were people at the symposium that said that they had one and they were going to sell it. But I know the latest model, that, at least from what I learned at the Ornamental Turning Society Symposium, was that they most people were after the David Lindo. The difference between the two that I could see, other than, you know, his probably has new up-to-date now. Anyways, this one has a whole lot of different setups for this piece that you know, doesn't have a blade. It has like a fine point, and you can set it up with this, which I haven't figured out yet, but it's like you can move this incrementally so that you can do like a spirograph kind of design with so you can change, you know, move it so that it makes your design go around. But there are different ones of these. This is the only one I've used so far. But the other one, I noticed that they were spending a lot of time balancing the machine. And I like that I don't have to do that on this one. So, other than that, you could probably just type in ornamental. This is a Paul Clare. You could type in, there's other different types. I know there's a lot of different ones. So a lot of people build their own. But if you looked on, you know, Googled ornamental turning lathe for sale, you probably come up with some. But there's probably about 100 people in the ornamental turning society that contact one of them and see if people have something for sale. That'd be my best guess. So, anyway, other than that, when you're done, there's a lot of dust to vacuum up, and it takes a long time. So, here's a good example. So this one has had several projects and a piece in between just to extend the distance. So if I smooth this off, then I could stick another one on. So I have two kinds of chucks that I use. This one is a screw-on, and this one is glued on. And I'm able to just mostly use the glued-on ones now. We had a lot of learning curve on how these attach, and most of it was to do with that in order to part your project when you're done, you have to put it on the lathe, the regular lathe, and the faster you go, the hotter this glue gets, and then pretty soon your bowl and your project are bouncing around the room instead of being attached. So the screwed on kind, you don't have that issue with it, but I have, with the help of asking or probably complaining about why is this happening, and people kind of giving me suggestions, that I have a system for that has taken care of that now. So you get your project. I use poplar as my like a base plate, and then I glue my project on there. These are some scrap starter pieces but basically that's the chuck glued on to a piece of poplar, and then my project, which I would part right here, and then I can reuse this piece, but especially because now it's already rounded out. So the next time if I put a bigger piece on, I don't have to round that out. So then this one is also just several pieces with the screw-on chuck. So to set up a project, then I could take, say, this scrap piece. It's already mounted on a chuck, and I could sand that flat, and then what I would do is put a little of this just plain white paper glue, just put it on there, rub it around with my finger, put on a layer of the cheapest paper towel you can find, and I just put that on, a little more glue, rub that around, hold over another layer, glue, and then I would take my block of wood, and so my block of wood, I have already decided that the height of this bowl is going to be within 1/4 of an inch of the height of this block of wood, because I'm going to smooth off the top as I'm doing my project. So once it's on the lathe, it's like this. And so I'm going to smooth that off. And then once I'm done, I am going to part the paper. I am not going to spend hours parting this hard wood. So once you get this on here with, you can see, we have this glued up in between, put our wood on top, and you want to try and get this really straight so that it is, otherwise it takes a long time to round it out, and you end up with whichever the smallest side of this is, your whole piece of wood is going to be narrowed down to that smallest diameter. So you get all that glued up, and then you have to clamp this on, and I just clamp them onto this, minus that. Clamp them on here, and you gotta let the glue dry overnight before you're ready to move forward with your project. Okay, so the rosettes have different shapes here. Heart. So, you know, you always have to start out with the round one, which is probably in my box right by the so sometimes I choose that, you know, like specifically, if I was going to do this heart, then I have to have a decent sized piece of wood in order to do that heart, because this point is so much deeper than this, than the curves. So, you know, even this piece of wood, it looks like it's going to be plenty big enough, but that heart, by the time it follows around, the bowl is not going to be as big as this piece is. So it will need to go down. So sometimes I choose my rosette, and then I find a piece of wood, like, say maybe I'm going to go up to that bigger piece. So I can center that and also look at all that nice grain, because I'm not going to have a whole lot of fancy detail down in the center of this bowl, but all of that pretty wood would look really quite amazing on there. And then I also would not make it, I don't want to make it real deep. I would, if I was going to do a heart, I would make it more shallow. So sometimes I choose the rosette first and then the wood. And sometimes I just find a really incredible piece of wood, and whether I know what it is or not, I have run into some pieces that make me have an allergic reaction from all the sawdust, and so I might avoid that kind. But then I might just put my mask on and tie something around my face if I really wanted to use the piece of wood. But sometimes I just choose the piece of wood to go with it. And if you're going to buy wood, label it, because by the time you or somebody else uses it, everybody always asks, what kind of wood is that? So if you don't know, then you just say, oh well. So this piece of wood would not do me a lot of good if I was trying to put it on a lathe, and so, but it could make probably four projects out of this. And so I have to cut it, and so I have a 10-inch bandsaw that is the right height for me. We have a bigger one, but I have to stand up on a stool to reach it, and it's older and makes a lot more noise, so I like this little one because I'm comfortable, more comfortable. So when you're finished with the ornamental part, this is just a scrap that's rounded. I found a crack in it after I got it rounded out, so I'm not going to finish that bowl. But you have to separate your bowl from your scrap piece, and therefore you need to have a regular lathe, because you need to get some speed going. Initially, this plan that my brother told me with putting the paper and the glue in between, and then you just take a chisel and tap, and then the bowl falls off. So that worked one time, but I haven't got to reproduce that. So you part. So you turn on your lathe, and rather than where I used to part, at least a half an inch in, which wastes a piece of wood, and also takes a long time because this is a hard wood. And so now I part where the paper and the glue is, and it takes so much less time. And then because I'm nervous of having it fall off when it gets down to the very center, or having it fly around the room, before I'm done, when I get to 3/4 of an inch or an inch, I pull out my trusty hacksaw and I just cut it, and then I can catch it underneath. So, therefore, in order to work with an ornamental turning lathe, you do need to have a regular lathe. It doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be hold a large space, but you do need to have a regular lathe. Parting tool. I had a bigger one. I have several chisels and things, but I'm comfortable with this small one. And the other thing that you do need to have right here is the ability to sharpen it up. So just rotates, has a stone, and I sharpen it with that. So once you get it off, you're ready to sand the bottom. Okay, so you're only looking to sand a piece. Let's pretend this is a bowl. The only piece you're going to sand is the very bottom, and so either a belt sander, or some of the belt sanders have a rounded disc that you can slide your piece up against, and that works good. But I had this, and I rigged this up, just clamped it on here upside down by the handle, and so pull it on, and I generally have a space about that big, and I can just, this is an 80 grit, and I just put it on here and get the bulk of, if there's any glue or paper, get it just flattened up. And then once I can level it on the table, then I use elbow grease, and I have probably 8 different, maybe there's 8 or so fine this of grit on, so 80, and then I move 100, 150 up to like 800, and I also got this little squishy piece that's, I think, for a microfiber thing, but anyway, it makes it nice and smooth. And that's kind of my favorite part, is when it's really smooth on the bottom and silky. So I just keep sanding until it's as smooth as I want, and then I use my tack cloth, and on the actual ornamental part, you're not going to sand that, but I can go over it a little bit with steel wool, just if there's any kind of basically dusty spots. But I like to use this Yorkshire grit, kind of a wax, and but it has little fine particles that will fill in any kind of grain and smooth it out. And so I put this on while it's still on the lathe, I put a plastic glove on, and then I just put it on a piece of cloth. I just use an old cloth like this, but cotton sock or something would work, and I just rub it all over, and then I usually just let it sit on the lathe, before then I can rub it some more while it's turning, and I do that before I part it. And so then once it's sanded, then I put a finish on it. I tried this walnut oil, but everything gets really dark, even though that is not dark oil. It makes everything dark like walnut, and so if you want to be able to see your grain, then you need to have just a clear finish. I've tried this, which I really like. Also smells really nice, the beeswax and orange. But you kind of, if you only put this, you're probably going to need to put more on because it like gets absorbed into the wood. So I've tried this, and I have to buy some more because I didn't get the lid tapped on tight enough, and so then it's kind of a gel in here. So that one works well. You have to sand with some steel wool in between, but you can't really sand all the ornamental part. So I am going to try this. I just got this. I haven't used it yet, but it has this really detailed trim work on it, and this is just a rub-on. So I'm assuming that this is going to work well for not having to sand in between. So I also have this one that I use on my painted projects, and I'm betting that it would work just as well. So lots of finishes, but I don't like to get them really high gloss. It's like I'm in this for seeing the grain of the wood. So you can't rush this. Like this one you have to rub it on and let it sit overnight. You can put another coat on in the morning, but pretty close, you're like one coat a day with this, and you want to get like 3 coats on there. So you can't be in a hurry with these projects. So they're pretty much going to take you a weekend to get the wood part done, and then the finishing comes later. So the projects are art. I have people that say, so what do you do with them? I'm like, well, they're sitting here on display. And so I've given some away to my family and friends, and but most of them are here. And they're very time consuming. By the time you glue up your piece and then leave it overnight, and then you get out there and set it up and round it off, and then you could round it off on a regular lathe, but I am more comfortable with the ornamental turning lathe, and so I round them off on there. And you know, you can go out for a couple of hours in the evening, and then a few more hours at a time on the weekend, and pretty much your bowl is taken at least a week from the time you glue it up till the time you put the last coat of finish on it. So it's a good portion of your time in there. Sometimes I have a piece of wood that I just, like this one has the, you know, that's how it was. And I went with that, and that was intentional, that it was going to have a chunk out of the side. So, but I think it's a beautiful piece of wood. This one turned out, I bought this scrap, or it wasn't a scrap, but I bought it at the wood shop, and it worked out fairly quick, but it's a soft piece of wood, and so I experimented and left that little plateau in the center, but it doesn't. You can see that it's soft because it's got grain that grabs from the inside. So this one, I got it all done, and I thought that it came out really beautiful, and I was showing it to my neighbor, and he said, what kind of wood is that? And I was like, I don't know. I think it's I don't know. It was just in the garage. And he said, oh, I bet it's myrtle wood. And So he said, because Dave had a lot of that. And then when I realized that, I thought, okay, I remember going on that trip to Coos Bay to buy that myrtle wood. And so this is my bowl. I'm not giving it away to anybody. And so then my son, the cameraman, came to visit and decided he would like to have a bowl. And I said, well, which one do you want? And then when I came back, he said, this one. I was like, anyone but that one. So he got this one, which is, the things that he liked about this was that the inside and outside shapes match. And he liked the little bevels, different shapes on the top. And he also liked the lighter grain wood. And this one is cool because it has some dark wood and some light wood. But, so he has his own that he likes. It's, I think, myrtle wood as well. This one is an extremely hard piece of wood. This was the learning project. And it, I got it all done, and it actually was probably a half an inch taller. But this is where we decided parting hardwood, especially a piece that thick, was going to be. So we were parting, it was glued on, and so the glue melted on the chuck and it was flying around the room and got itself a few dings in the edges. And so then my younger son decided he would try and cut it on the bandsaw, but because it's round, it slipped and he smacked his finger on it and he's like, okay, this one is done. And so it was just attached. And so then when he left town, I was like, okay, I'm going to figure something out for this. And so I just glued it up. I attached it to a chuck that I screwed on. I glued I screwed it onto the piece that was, actually, I sanded it off flat. And then, because it had a big block on here, and I sanded that smooth, and then I screwed on a chuck that would keep it secure on the regular lathe. And then rather than try to part it where it was, I cut it with a hacksaw. It took me a long time to get through there, but I did it, and then I was able to sand it off. And then I had to sand out a few, can't even hardly see them now. There's a couple of little dings from where it was bouncing about the room, little tiny spots. But anyway, there's one where I had to sand it down, but I saved it. And my son was so pleased when I sent him a picture of it, that this one that we learned so much on. And I really like this piece of wood, so anyway, there's a few stories and things. This was my very first one. This is where I was having all the issues with the bouncing, the skipping, so all of the curves are not even. I sanded on it a little bit, but see, it shouldn't have these little pieces in the distance. It should be just a clean, but it was skipping in there. So anyway, we got the skipping incident figured out. So this wood is the, I think it's African blackwood. And this piece was a scrap that came from, there's sort of an odd shape when you get them. It looks like a bell because it is the leftover scrap of what came off of a piece that made a clarinet. And it's extremely hard, and so that's why it's only half as deep as the height of it. It takes forever to cut on that one. But anyway, this one is one of my favorites because it's really smooth on the bottom, and for some reason I must have been having an issue getting the depth on it, but I decided, you know what, I like it the way it is right there, and so I stopped. And so it's very shallow. It just looks like a little tower, but I love the grain in it. And this piece actually, while I was cutting, was like orange and purple and yellows in here. And so that's the part that I get to see that you